Micro and small enterprises employ vast numbers of people throughout the developing world, often women, and frequently poor. Many poor families depend on micro-enterprise for their livelihood. Although many work alone, these small businesses inevitably compete as part of a much larger economic system. Within this system, they struggle to survive in a fast-changing business environment. Micro and small enterprises must continually respond to change. Changes in technology, changing prices, and a changing regulatory environment. While change exposes some micro-enterprises to grave danger, it opens up opportunities for others to grow. But where are the opportunities for micro-enterprises to grow? An analytical tool called subsector analysis can help to identify promising opportunities. A subsector encompasses the overall economic supply system in which micro-enterprises operate. In the case of silk, that system, or subsector, includes several related industries. The reeling industry, which produces silk yarn. The weaving industry. And the retail network that distributes silk cloth. Subsector analysis is built around 4 key concepts. Most micro-enterprises work in vertical supply chains. They purchase inputs and market output through micro-enterprises or larger firms. Small producers compete among themselves, and they compete with larger firms employing different technologies. Coordination examines how policies and regulations affect subsector enterprises and how these enterprises interact. Leverage examines how support institutions can intervene most effectively. With one-on-one assistance, they can reach only a handful of the many millions of micro-enterprises. But because subsector analysis focuses on a single activity, it can lead to leveraged interventions, those that affect large numbers of micro-enterprises at a single stroke. With millions looking for jobs each year, we must seek ways to help large numbers of poor people find productive work. And since project resources are limited, we must apply them where they will benefit many people at least cost. Subsector analysis can be used by support institutions to achieve this objective. It does so by providing a framework for understanding the structure and dynamics of specific micro-enterprise supply systems. To see subsector analysis in action, consider an example from the Thai silk subsector. Now we will follow a team from CARE Thailand as they investigate the Thai silk subsector. You and the team will work through the three major phases of analysis, step by step. In selecting a subsector for study, you will normally want to consider three criteria: size, growth prospects, and priority target groups. In size, silk overwhelms other microenterprise activities. It engages over 800,000 people nationwide. With sales of over $200 million per year and anticipated 10% annual growth, silk is an important part of the Thai economy. The explosion of tourism in Thailand has swept silk production along with it. The poorest region of the country, northeast Thailand, supplies over 90% of Thai silk to this growing market. Women have traditionally predominated among village silk producers. CARE is interested in the silk subsector because of its enormous size, clear growth potential, and because of its importance to village women in Thailand's most depressed region. To introduce yourself to the subsector, you must immerse yourself by reading background literature. And most important, by visiting silk producers. Traditional villagers in northeast Thailand practice silk rearing much as they have for over 1,000 years. Silk production requires mulberry leaves, the silkworm's only food. Each household raises a small plot of mulberry. Village women rear silkworms in trays under their home. The production cycle starts with a female moth. She lays several hundred eggs from which tiny silkworms hatch about 1 week later. Young worms require finely chopped mulberry leaves. As the worms grow, they are able to feed on larger and larger pieces of mulberry leaves. After about 3 weeks, the worms reach maturity. Now they are ready to enter the next stage of their life cycle, cocooning. Placed in cocooning trays, they excrete a single thread and wind it around themselves to make a cocoon. Safe inside, they become pupae. If left to mature, a moth hatches from the cocoon to start the life cycle again. But the hatching destroys the single strand of silk thread that envelops the moth. So, before the moth hatches, the producer places the cocoons in boiling water. This kills the worms and also softens the natural gums in the cocoon, allowing it to be unwound. When a thread breaks, the reeler knots it, creating the rough texture characteristic of hand-reeled yarn. The reeler tries to maintain a constant number of cocoons in the pot in order to produce silk yarn of uniform thickness. The thread on the inside of the cocoon yields the finest thread, while that on the outside is the coarsest. Consequently, the reeling produces different grades of silk yarn. After reeling her yarn, the producer dyes it herself. Now she is ready to set up her hand loom. Depending on her skill, she will weave traditional male sarongs, or the more intricate tie-dyed mutmis for women. Mutmi is tie-dye based on traditional Lao and Khmer patterns. It is immensely time-consuming and requires great skill in dyeing, setup, and actual weaving. Some cloth is sold to provide cash for the household, but most satisfies family needs. They reserve the finest pieces for special occasions or for gifts. Traditional weaves are more popular with the older generation than with the youth. In contrast to the traditional village producer, a growing number of households are specializing as yarn suppliers. Instead of weaving their yarn into cloth, they sell it to a network of yarn traders who deliver it to the large weaving factories in the silk centers of northeast Thailand. The different grades of yarn command greatly different prices. A third category of village household specializes still further. They do not reel yarn, but instead sell cocoons to private factories that reel them by machine. Like these village women, some male farmers have also begun to specialize in cocoon production. These commercial farmers rear silkworms on a much larger scale. For them, cocoon production becomes a full-time occupation. Both the village women and commercial farmers transport their cocoons to assembly points for sale to buyers from the reeling mills. The decision to specialize in yarn or cocoon production revolves around access to new technologies. The first, improved silkworm breeds, lies at the heart of increased productivity in silk production. Native yellow varieties, although well adapted to Thailand, produce small cocoons with short, weak threads. Improved breeds of yellow Thai hybrids produce threads that are not only stronger, but also twice as long. Still larger and more productive are the exotic white hybrids bred from improved Japanese and Chinese silkworms. The National Sericulture Research Institute, NSRI, began breeding improved hybrid silkworms in the 1960s. To produce them requires sophisticated equipment and scientific breeding techniques. Along with the Department of Agricultural Extension, the DOAE, they multiply hybrid worms and produce egg sheets. Each egg sheet contains 20,000 silkworm eggs. Representatives from each village collect orders for egg sheets from each rearing household. They then converge on the DOAE distribution points on a set day to collect a packet containing egg sheets for their entire village. To raise the larger hybrid silkworms, farmers require more mulberry. The increased demand for mulberry has led to the development of hybrid mulberry plants, with yields double those of traditional varieties. Because hybrid silkworms are more vulnerable to disease and temperature variation, rearing facilities must improve when households switch to hybrid silkworms. Commercial farmers rear white hybrids in rearing houses with cement floors and wire netting. Another key technology addresses the needs of households who have chosen to specialize in yarn production. Their single biggest constraint is the tight 4-day window in which they must reel all their increased production before the worms emerge and destroy the cocoon. Improved reeling machines allow village women to reel in 1 day what would take them 5 days to reel by hand. And semi-automatic reelers are 10 to 15 times as fast as hand reeling. By dramatically decreasing labor time required for reeling, these improved machines allow village women to reel larger batches of cocoons associated with the hybrid yellow varieties. These new technologies, hybrid silkworms, hybrid mulberry, improved rearing rooms, and improved reeling machines have led some village households to specialize as either producers of yarn or suppliers of cocoons. Commercial reeling and weaving factories have sprung up to process the yarn and cocoons supplied by the village households. But these factories are concentrated outside of CARE's Ubon project area. To see how CARE's target villages are linked to this larger system, we must travel to Korat and Bakton Chai, the center of the Thai silk industry. As we meet and interview participants in the larger system, we are after 4 pieces of information. On the road to Korat, we discover a yarn buying depot operated by one of Thailand's largest silk weaving companies. The network of yarn traders that supply this depot link specialized village yarn producers with the large factory weavers. Village households who rear white cocoons must sell to one of a dozen small reeling mills, such as this. The reeling mills will buy only hybrid cocoons with their longer and stronger threads. The reelers purchase cocoons from villagers at the NSRI assembly points or directly from small commercial farmers. Soon after purchasing, the cocoons must be steamed to kill the worms and enable storage. As with hand reeling, the small factory begins by immersing the cocoons in hot water. Operators must count and maintain the number of cocoons in each basin to assure uniformity of the yarn. After reeling and winding the yarn onto hanks, the reeled yarn is now ready for distribution. Half a dozen large reeling mills such as this process the bulk of hybrid cocoons produced in Thailand. The large reeling companies, like the small, first sort their cocoons and then steam them to permit storage. Apart from the difference in scale, what distinguishes the large reelers from their small-scale counterparts is the level of automation. This automation ensures more uniform, higher quality yarn. Output of the large reeling factories is 10 to 20 times that of the small mills, and they employ several hundred people each, mostly women. To ensure an adequate supply of white cocoons, large reeling mills contract with commercial farmers to rear hybrid silkworms for them. Most large reelers supply improved mulberry, hybrid white egg sheets, and extension support to their contract farmers. A typical large reeler contracts with 400 to 500 farmers, each with 2 to 4 hectares of mulberry, over 20 times as much as the household rearer. Weaving factories, like reelers, come in a variety of sizes. Hundreds of small weaving factories like this one operate throughout northeast Thailand. Often family-owned, they operate 10 to 20 looms. Unlike the traditional village looms, these looms have fly shuttles which greatly increase speed and output. Depending on the skill of its weavers, a factory may produce traditional tie-dye as well as plain bolt cloth. Most weaving factories operate their own retail outlet. The large weaving factories operate on a different scale, although still with hand looms. They use imported and Thai white yarns for warp, which runs the length, and yellow yarns for the weft, which runs the width of a bolt of cloth. They dye their own yarn, using only the best industrial dyes. At the factory, special teams set up the warp yarn on the looms in preparation for weaving. Weaving requires great skill. It is demanding and well paid. Nearby, whole villages work as subcontract weavers for the factories. The factory sets up the warp yarn on a spindle and delivers it to the weaver, who weaves in the weft yarn. The factory imposes strict output quotas and enforces high-quality standards. By village standards, contract weaving is highly paid, 4 to 10 times the rate traditional households can earn, so competition is keen. Yet opportunities for contract weaving are limited to villagers living within roughly a 10 to 15 kilometer radius around the large weaving factories. One of the oldest and largest of the weaving companies, the Jim Thompson Company, has defined the image and reputation of modern Thai silk. The company performs all steps necessary for silk production, from research to retailing. They use improved technology at all stages. Improved mulberry, hybrid silkworms, the best dyes and designs, and improved fly shuttle looms to produce their renowned silk fabrics. At this stage, you need to step back, take stock, and organize your field notes. A subsector map is the tool you use to summarize what you know about a subsector's structure and how it functions. Start by identifying the principal functions in silk production. List them vertically along the left-hand side of a sheet of paper. Identify the principal markets across the top. The functions and markets form a grid onto which you place the participants that supply each market. Rectangles represent the participants, and the height of each rectangle indicates how many functions that participant performs. Traditional household producers perform all functions themselves. But within the last 20 years, some households have begun to specialize in yarn production. They supply the factory's ever-growing needs for weft yarn through the network of yarn traders. Other village households produce only white cocoons, which they sell to small-scale reeling companies. The yarn moves on to the factory weaving mills for use as warp yarn. Like traditional households, the Jim Thompson Company performs all functions necessary, from growing mulberry to retailing. But unlike the traditional households, they use improved technology at each stage. Although highly stylized, this very simple map highlights how village households are linked into the larger system. To describe the system more fully, a worksheet will help you summarize the rich detail recorded in your field notes. Since you will develop the map from this worksheet, first list all the functions as they will appear on it. Then, across the top, instead of final markets, list each distinct category of participant in the system. Start with the traditional household producer who performs all functions, from mulberry production to retailing. In contrast, the household yarn producer stops at reeling. Some produce their own silkworm eggs from mother moths, while others who buy egg sheets from the DOAE skip this function. Next come the yarn traders, the household cocoon producers, small reeling mills, large weaving factories, and the Jim Thompson Company. In addition to these, you have seen a number of other participants. The National Sericulture Research Institute, the Department of Agricultural Extension, which distributes egg sheets, Commercial farmers who grow mulberry and rear white hybrid cocoons. The large reeling mills. And contract farmers that supply them with cocoons. Then the small weaving factories. And finally, the household contract weavers. Note that 4 participants who purchase egg sheets from others do not perform this function themselves. Drawing a subsector map is like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Your task is to align participants so that each lies directly above the enterprise they buy from. For example, the yarn traders buy yellow weft yarn from village yarn producers, who, in turn, sell to small and large weaving factories. The village cocoon producers buy egg sheets from DOAE assembly points, which in turn are supplied by NSRI. They sell cocoons to small reelers, who then sell their white yarn to the weaving factories. Commercial farmers also sell white cocoons to the small reelers. Contract farmers supply both the large reeling mills and the Jim Thompson Company with hybrid cocoons. Note that dotted lines indicate contract sales. The large reelers sell white warp yarn directly to the factory weavers. Like the Jim Thompson Company, they subcontract with whole villages of household weavers. Aligning the participants in this way allows you to distinguish among different supply channels. By adjusting the width, you can indicate the relative size of each channel. The traditional household producers in Channel 1 supply the traditional sarong and matmi cloth for ceremonial use. The remaining channels service the much larger modern Thai silk market, selling to tourists, export, and upscale Thai consumers. The environment includes institutions and policies that affect the competitiveness and conduct of each channel. Household silk producers in Channels 2 and 3 depend especially on 2 institutions, the National Sericulture Research Institute and the Department of Agricultural Extension, for critical inputs: hybrid mulberry and egg sheets. Like institutions, government policies affect all subsector participants. For example, they all complain loudly about vacillating policies on silk yarn imports. When government institutes yarn import quotas, they protect domestic reeling mills. But quotas impose costs on weaving factories, who are forced to purchase yarn at above world prices. For the households and commercial farmers who supply white cocoons to the reeling mills, these changing import quotas mean that one moment cocoons are in great demand, the next they cannot be sold because yarn imports reduce sales by the reeling mills. A second policy, government's 50% subsidy on hybrid egg sheets, also affects the competitiveness of household producers. The egg sheet subsidy artificially increases the financial returns to households rearing yellow and white hybrid silkworms. It also limits the supply of egg sheets by reducing budgetary resources of the National Sericulture Research Institute and by stifling incentives for private firms to supply egg sheets. Also part of the environment are a variety of donors and NGOs. To refine your initial understanding of the silk subsector requires more field interviewing and research. As events unfolded in this particular study, further investigation revealed one principal refinement. The team discovered an entirely new channel they had overlooked before, the power looms. Recently set up by Japanese companies, these power looms use imported yarn to produce high-quality kimono silk for export to Japan. Overlays display quantitative data on top of the basic subsector map. The first overlay, Enterprise Numbers, indicates how many enterprises operate in each channel. Focusing on village households, the overlay shows that nearly 300,000 traditional producers operate in Channel 1, while a further 65,000 have become specialized yarn producers in Channel 2. In contrast, the sales overlay indicates that the nearly 300,000 households in Channel 1 account for only 10% of total silk sales. Still, another overlay shows how much households can earn per day in each channel. Among CARE's target group, households have clear incentives to move out of Channel 1 and into Channels 2, 3, 4, and 5. These incentives play a large role in driving subsector dynamics. Because of the low returns in traditional silk production, many observers believe Channel 1 will become extinct within the next 20 years. But the channels supplying modern Thai silk will continue to grow at about 10% per year. So rapidly, in fact, that domestic yarn producers have not been able to keep pace. Demand for weft yarn is especially robust. For their income to grow, village silk producers must move from Channel 1 to those channels servicing the modern Thai silk market. They have clear incentives to switch from Channel 1 to Channels 2, 3, or 4, and 5, where more productive technology dramatically increases their earnings. To participate in the growing market segments, villagers living near large weaving factories may aspire to become contract weavers. But the vast majority who live elsewhere depend on two key bridges. First are the yarn merchants, who purchase the yellow weft yarn from household producers and deliver it to factories. In the process, they provide information on quality and trends in factory weaving. Alternatively, villagers can link with the modern Thai silk market by selling white cocoons to small reeling factories. But the small reeler bridge is considerably more risky. Volatile world silk prices, in large measure caused by China's overwhelming control of world silk markets, and changing yarn import quotas in Thailand, lead to wildly fluctuating demand for white cocoons. Although very profitable, white cocoon sales are risky, with uncertain long-term prospects. Villagers who wish to cross either of these two bridges must overcome three key constraints. First, they must at least double mulberry output to begin rearing hybrid silkworms. Second, they need access to egg sheets, yet the DOAE can supply only a fraction of total demand. And third, village yarn producers face severe time constraints in trying to reel expanded output within the 4 days before the cocoons hatch. To overcome the reeling constraint, village yarn producers need improved reeling sets. To supply sufficient egg sheets to village producers, DOAE and NSRI require larger budgets. Or villagers can avoid the DOAE egg sheet bottleneck by becoming contract farmers with large reeling mills. But this option is only available to commercial farmers with 2 to 5 hectares of mulberry living near the big silk centers. To increase mulberry output on their limited land holdings, rearing households need to double mulberry yields. This can best be done by planting or grafting hybrid mulberry stock. Through your analysis, you have identified 3 key constraints common to many thousands of village silk producers. You have also identified potential solutions. Which of these can be delivered to many households at once? To systematically search for leverage, you must look for one of 3 key indicators. System nodes can be thought of as funnels where large volumes of product pass through only a few hands. Villagers gather at assembly points to collect egg sheets and to sell white cocoons at the end of each 20-day production cycle. By visiting the assembly point on the right day, an interested agency could contact representatives of hundreds of villagers and demonstrate reeling equipment or gather and dispense information. Policies, by their nature, affect thousands of firms at a single stroke. If an agency could influence government policy on yarn import quotas, it would greatly reduce the risk involved in white cocoon production. But this will prove difficult for outsiders, given the powerful entrenched interests in reeling and weaving. More likely is increasing egg sheet supply, perhaps through reduced egg sheet subsidies. Your final task is to identify leveraged interventions, those that assist many households at least cost. Start with the 3 key constraints and potential solutions you identified in Step 7. Then ask yourself, which of these solutions offer prospects for leverage? Developing improved reeling equipment has the potential to raise productivity of 60,000 or more village producers. And to demonstrate improved reeling equipment, you could reach hundreds of households at a time via yarn merchants or assembly points. To increase egg sheet supply through DOAE and NSRI, their budgets must be increased. Abolishing subsidies would provide incentive for private firms to supply egg sheets. Policy leverage could be the means of achieving this. With Mulberry, you may be able to develop leverage by training selected farmers or small nursery operators in grafting techniques. They, in turn, could provide grafting services directly to villagers. In all, you have identified 3 leveraged interventions that could unblock growth potential for tens of thousands of rural households. This concludes the final phase of your analysis. You began by introducing yourself to the subsector. Then, refining your understanding. And finally, you explored opportunities for leveraged interventions. You now have a good understanding of how to promote village household participation in the growing and ever-changing Thai silk subsector. Experience suggests that subsector analysis is a valuable tool for designing projects in a wide range of micro and small enterprise subsectors. Many institutions, from NGOs to multilateral agencies, have successfully applied subsector analysis, as have people from a wide range of backgrounds. Consider how much you have learned about Thai silk in a very short time. And remember that the silk subsector is very complex. Most studies you undertake will be much simpler. To analyze a subsector of interest, you will usually need 2 people for about 4 weeks. We encourage you to explore the potential of this simple but powerful project design tool.